So yeah, I've got a few questions here that came in from Radio 2 listeners, and they're questions about the records that we had a chance to talk about this week. So going back to the record we talked about Monday, there's a question here from a guy named Sean in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I mentioned to you that this might be coming, a favorite from Apollo, for me and many others, is Deep Blue Day. And Brian Eno sets a soundscape with the expansive, all-enveloping synth texture that you play some guitar chording with, later accompanying slide guitar that always puts me on a otherworldly beach because it sounded very much like, to Sean here, he says it sounds very much like Hawaiian slide guitar. So it made him curious to know if you have some particular influences with your approach to slide guitar in particular.
Well, it's a steel guitar. It's a pedal steel guitar, so you change the pitch of the strings with your feet.
Right.
And it's one of my first instruments, and I was always pretty much a country player. I played some of the classic country songs on it, and when I got a chance to play with Eno, it still had a little twist of country in it, but it had another kind of feeling because Deep Blue Day has these wonderful waves. I suppose that could be perceived as Hawaiian.
Right.
Waves kind of coming in and out, and there was just something very primal about it, almost like the kind of sound that you'd hear even in the absence of any cities, just the ocean. And when I put my steel guitar on it, it promoted a certain kind of playing where I wasn't about to be too active. It was about melody and staying liquid. And it was very much part of the beginning of this whole new style that I have of playing the steel guitar.
Mm-hmm. And do you have personal favorites, other musicians that play the steel, whether it's the pedal steel or the lap steel?
I like Santo and Johnny.
Yeah.
From the rock and roll, the birth of rock and roll, late 50s.
Yeah.
There's a very famous instrumental of theirs called Sleepwalk, which to this day resonates true.
Yeah, it's a great one. Now here's a question about U2's record Achtung Baby, and this one comes from a listener named Scott. And he says, one of my favorite songs from the album is Ultraviolet, Light My Way. So he's wondering, how did the final version ultimately evolve? And he goes on to say, it seemed to have its roots in some earlier cuts that had pieces of, and you can let Scott here know if he's on the right track, but he's hearing pieces of The Fly, Lady with the Spinning Head, and so he's curious to know how the final version of Ultraviolet came about.
Well, Ultraviolet was always driven by this idea that it should be a song that the Righteous Brothers didn't put out. Baby, 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 oh, baby, baby. That kind of sentiment which really belonged to that time.
Right.
And Bono said, can I get away with saying baby, baby, baby? I said, yeah, it's time. It's time.
Yeah. And how about Scott here is wondering if ideas for this song or maybe others were taken from other demos that maybe didn't get worked up all the way. Does that sort of thing happen?
Well, Scott's not too far off here. That's just what happens with records. You build your own menu by maybe you got a part of the menu has the good riffs and some lyric couplets that are strong, and maybe there's a chord sequence here, and somebody has a beat idea, and so your menu builds up. And even though something may not be brought to full conclusion in itself, then it's still an available ingredient that can be imported to a given song. So I forget the specifics of the journey, but I think Scott's not too far off instinctively.
Got a question here. This one came in via email from a listener named Santiago. He has a question about Bob Dylan's record, Oh Mercy. And he says, in this record, Dylan's singing and songwriting are, in my view, suddenly much stronger compared to some of his previous 80s records. So what was your approach to helping an artist, I don't know if he's asking specifically about Bob or just artists in general, in delivering their best work?
Well, it's very important to get as we talked about earlier, getting the center right, and I wanted to make sure that Bob's lyrics and his vocal delivery were fully optimized. And by not having a lot of hullabaloo in the room, it meant that his vocal delivery got all the attention.
Right.
So I was really on top of every moment of performance. I wanted to make sure that we could hear every word, we could hear every breath, that we had the best sound. I had this beautiful microphone that came out of the old Massey Hall here in Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
I bought they were refurbishing the place some years back, and I bought their 2 Sony C37As that they used to keep in the ceiling for orchestral recordings.
Right, yeah.
And so that's the mic that I use on Bob's voice, and it has an interesting property. You can get real close to it, so you get that sound, the proximity sound.
Yeah.
When you like, if you get a little closer, you get more bass.
Yeah.
So you can do that with the C37A and not blow it out. So there's a bit of a secret weapon of fidelity. So that's it. That's what we're hearing. We got the center first, and then we framed after.
Huh. Interesting, a connection to the history of Massey Hall.
Yeah.
On that one. A question here about Brandon Flowers' record Flamingo, and this one comes in from Jessica, who wrote to us from Brick, New Jersey. And she wants to know what it was like working with Brandon, a relatively young solo artist, after having worked with other musicians that had been in the industry for decades. Was that a difficult thing to adjust to, or was it refreshing? We talked about that a little bit before, but I guess he would have been younger than a lot of other folks that you had worked with in the previous years. Was that a thing at all, or was it not even really?
Well, I never thought about the age of Brandon, but I certainly thought about his commitment and his intelligence and his knowledge. He's a musicologist. Excuse me. He has an incredible knowledge of popular music, more than myself. And so he, where he has gotten to as a music lover, it was a very different journey for him than it was for me. So I was fascinated with his knowledge, and I guess that would have been the main difference. And like always, we like to optimize potential. So I saw potential in this knowledge, and I was curious about how he saw music and how he wanted to make music, and very electro-driven, very pop-driven. And I got no trouble with pop songs if they're great.
Yeah, right.
So we definitely had something in common there.
Yeah. So there you go, Jessica. Got one more here, a question about Neil Young's record Lanois. And this one came in from someone who's a community member on our website. He goes by the name Uber Miguel.
Okay.
And so here's what he's wondering. He says, The Edge and Neil Young are two of my favorite guitarists, but they clearly have different approaches to playing guitar, especially when it comes to effects. Do you see any commonality between the two in their approach to the instrument? That's an interesting question.
Yes, I see commonality. Is there such a word, commonality?
Commonality, I guess so,
okay.
Sure.
Neil Young loves riffs.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to Cinnamon Girl, for example, you realize that a big part of the song is the riff behind the singing.
Yeah.
And the Edge is very much a parts man as well. So he fixes on a part, and that's the part of the song that is a complement to Bono's vocal. So they have that in common. In terms of sound, obviously the Edge built quite a strong identity with the use of echoes.
Yeah.
Pretty much a triplet echo.
Yeah.
Across the straight four. And Neil likes gadgets as well. He's got a great electric sound live, and he wouldn't do the echo thing. He doesn't do the Edge thing, but he does his own thing. It's like he has like a massive pedal board that.
Right.
It's like a secret pedal board. It's just a big piece of aluminum, really, with the secret sounds under it. So he doesn't tell anybody what his sounds do. But Neil did an incredible thing. He hooked up a throttle cable to his amp volume. So that when he wants to turn up, he just pushes the pedal on the floor. Now that's not a booster. That's not like a little booster, as you know, you can get a booster from any music store. But this is a throttle cable, so it was like kind of like reaching over and turning the amp up, but he could do it with his foot. So there's a little Neil Young secret there let out into the world. The throttle cable idea.
Throttle cable. Oh, so there you go, Uber Miguel. So thanks again.
So yeah, my pleasure. So thanks everybody.